kind of yeah, demystify medicinal plants. What they mean. What does it mean when I say a medicinal plant? How to use them safely, and what the limitations are for them. So, not attributing, how to attribute the appropriate amount of respect and utility to them in a clinical setting. So we're not overestimating their potential and their value, but at the same time, we have a good understanding of what they actually can contribute to our health and well-being, if that makes sense. So, so I think just because it's in my direct line of sight, I'm going to use foxglove as a really good example of a medicinal plant. And then perhaps we can use that. I didn't plan to do that, and actually, well, I'm glad I am doing that. So we'll use foxglove as an example to take us through what it means, and it will also take us through the history of herbal medicine in this country, but also more generally, and then into pharmacy, and then looking forward. So that will be the structure of this talk. I've just decided. And so the foxglove. So behind you, if people don't know what the foxglove, does everyone know what a foxglove looks like?
Yes.
Yep. So it's a really beautiful plant. It's usually growing in glades, and it's usually associated to woodlands. Most people know it as highly toxic, and that's because it contains these cardiac glycosides. So these compounds, they act on the cardiovascular system at certain receptors in the heart, and we're going to use some technical words, and I'm going to explain them. So the cardiac glycosides, digitalis, digoxin, these are the compounds that are extracted from the foxglove. So the foxglove is a plant. In herbal medicine, you would be able to make a tincture from it. So you'd be able to steep foxglove, the flowers at the head, in alcohol, and you'd be able to extract digitalis. So you need different solvents to extract different types of compounds depending on their chemical makeup. So as a fair rule, if you're using 50% ethanol, a vodka, for example, then you can extract the water-soluble constituents, which is called hydrophilic, and we can extract the oil-soluble constituents, which we call lipophilic. Okay, so this, in chemistry, we categorize compounds by how soluble they are in oil and water, and that's a really important basic concept that you need to keep in mind if you're planning to work with medicinal plants or planning to extract from medicinal plants. Even if you're just making a tea, if you're making a cup of tea, for example, just bring me back if I go too far away from what we're talking about, but if you're making a tea of turmeric, everybody knows turmeric. If you make a tea that's water-based with turmeric, it will be quite an inadequate extraction, because the active compound in turmeric is curcumin, which is oil-soluble for the most part. Which is why when you add milk and it's warm and you can make a good extraction, you can see it becoming a very vibrant yellow color. The curcumin, which is also a pigment, a yellow pigment, is also related to the medicinal activity of turmeric. So you can have the same plant, which is the turmeric, the root, but it will be in two different strengths, and it will have two different clinical effects. It will have two different strength effects based on the extraction. So just to quickly highlight that. Back to the foxglove. You can make it so folk in folk history, it was usually the domain of women to hold this knowledge, and you know that's where the witches came from, and the witch hunts and these kind of that whole phenomena occurred because women would be responsible for the most part to take care of the community in their health and well-being in that sense. So they held a lot of the knowledge of the plants. Later it became, when we have the medicalization of these things and the specialization of medicine, it becomes and I guess it's the blocking of women into higher education in this country. We have medicine shifting into the domain of predominantly men until more recent times. But what I wanted to just focus on is that knowledge of how to extract foxglove was mostly from the domain of, and doctors. Can't remember the doctor now. Who it was? Can't remember the name of the doctor who actually went to go and learn the extraction of foxglove for dropsy, which was the old term for heart failure. So, back to the cardiac glycosides, digitalis, digoxin. They are negatively chronotropic, which means it slows the heart down. Okay, slows the heart down. So the brain, so the heart has its own beat, has its own beat, and these are regulated by the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous systems. So sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, more or less. Parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. Negatively chronotropic means that those cardiac glycosides act on receptors at the heart to slow the heart down. Negatively chronotropic. At the same time, it's positively inotropic, which means that it makes the heart beat harder. So it makes the heart beat slower, but harder. Okay, and that's to do with the interaction with the particular heart muscle cells. Okay, they're very specialized muscle cells. We won't go into that. So, in what conditions is that useful? Well, the main condition that's useful is heart failure, and that's what it was used for traditionally. Was heart failure. So heart failure is characterized by swollen legs from fluid building up at the venous side of the body, not able to come because the heart's unable to fulfill its role in pushing. There's a lot to it, but basically it's characterized by swelling in the legs, poor and weak heartbeat, heart rate. So digoxin is used for that, to increase the strength of muscle contractions. So why are we talking about foxglove? Well, foxglove is used traditionally for that, but it's also used now for hypertension, so high blood pressure. So because you slow the heart rate, you reduce the pressure in the cardiovascular system, gently slow the heart. But it's used now in its isolated form. Digoxin is used in hospitals now, less so because we have other alternatives. But it's a really good example of how a plant was used in this country as a herbal medicine for a condition, and it still is being used, going through the chemical kind of revolution, pharmaceutical revolution, chemical revolution, and now we have actual drugs. So you can find them in your pharmacy in little packets of, little digoxin packets. Does that make sense? Have I said anything that it's difficult to understand, or would you like clarification on? That's definitely one of the take-home messages. Yeah. So don't eat that plant, even if you are self-diagnosing yourself with heart failure or hypertension. Great. Thank you for the support. Yeah, definitely. I would definitely say do not self-prescribe that plant. So why is that? What happens if you take too much? What's going to happen?
Stops it, slows it down.
Exactly. It slows it too much, and then it can stop your heart. That's right. Yeah. So a very beautiful plant, very attractive plant, very useful plant, very dangerous plant. So a lot of respect goes to the foxglove. Digitalis purpurea is the Latin, and that's where the compound's name is coming from. So digitalis. So when we're talking about medicinal plants, you can't really do it, and it's the same for ecology. So herbal medicine and ecology. So I'm as a forest ecologist. And as a medical herbalist, I've shifted away from reductionist kind of modalities trying to shift away from those reductionist methodologies. So what that means is science, we mentioned it yesterday in the fungi talk, reducing down natural phenomena to its constituent parts, and as I mentioned yesterday, it's derived from the Greek ideas of trying to come to the atom, atomos, trying to come to the most, this indivisible, the smallest indivisible unit that we know of. So it's really focused on matter, on matter, and bringing it down to its indivisible parts. That's what we all grew up. We all did science at school, and we all learnt about atoms and atomic elements and so on and so forth. What I would like us to shift to is to understand that whether we're talking about a medicinal plant which contains hundreds of constituents, or whether we're talking about an ecosystem which contains hundreds of different species, we would like us to look at, instead of the individual components, well, yes, we look at the individual components, but also the relationship, the interrelationship between each other, which we're not so good at. And as I alluded to yesterday, I think some of you were here at yesterday's talk, that has implications. That has implications socially, culturally, when we are not prioritizing relationships. And there's a good body of work. There's a really good body of work by social scientists discussing them. So what I'm saying is, I'm inviting you to look at medicinal plants as a very complex collection of very interesting constituents. And to really understand the whole plant, it's very difficult to do. So we have to do it in observation, because we didn't have access to the high-tech analytical techniques that we do have now. So yeah, so when we're looking at a medicinal product, for example, you want to buy a packet of tea, or you want to buy a herbal supplement. What we can do is say, this is the active compound. We know there is at least one active compound in this plant. Let's just use turmeric, for example. So in turmeric, the one active compound that we know of is curcumin. There are actually hundreds of other potentially bioactive compounds in that root, in that plant. But we know curcumin has been tested in the lab. It's shown anti-inflammatory effects, very strong and very good, reliable anti-inflammatory effects. So we're going to go with that. When you buy a supplement, you want to look for a certain percentage of curcuminoids, of those compounds that we know have an established anti-inflammatory effect. And so that's a good start. That's how you would go about it. We had some great questions yesterday about how to go forward in the nutraceutical, pharmaceutical circles, sectors. And ideally, you'd have a library of compounds with their known medicinal effects and their impact on your health. So if I take you, for example, and I could analyze you and analyze your health and your different bodily systems, and I could have a profile of compounds here from this one plant, just from turmeric, and say, okay, what it's going to be good for you, how, and if I could do that, I can't do that, but if I could do that, that would be very useful. Now, turmeric is just one plant. Then if I make you, as a herbalist, I make you a blend of turmeric, ashwagandha, I don't know, holy basil, then I've got a collection of plants that I know would be good for you, but how do I show that to you on a chemical and in an analytical way? How would I match it to your pathology? Hopefully you don't have any pathology, but if you did, then... So what I'm trying to say is that it becomes infinitely complex. And medical herbalism, as opposed to pharmacy, is an invitation to shift into the right hemisphere and shift into a more holistic way of knowing what someone needs from the symptoms that they present with, what someone needs without the use of very, very intense and very, very analytical, because it does really become infinitely complex. And we do need some complexity. We need to embrace the complexity rather than try to overanalyze it and try to bring it as an exact science, because it will never be an exact science. And that's why we struggle so much with medicinal plants in the West, is because we're looking for it to be an exact science. It's also why we are wreaking havoc and on ecological destruction, because we struggle to see the beauty in complexity. We see that it's very challenging for us to just stand back and take in what we see we struggle with it, and now yeah. Okay, there's lots to talk about that. Does that make sense? Yes. Go.
I'm interested in the gut microbiome and what kind of studies are happening around the synergistic effects of the herbals that you're talking about and the effect on the microbiome and Western diets compared to Eastern diets and the bioavailability and all of that. As you just said, the holistic approach and over analysis, but I'm still interested in what kind of sort of double-blind studies and meta-analysis studies that are going. I mean, it seems to muddy the water and also clarify other things at the same time. So, yeah, gut microbiome wise, is that play an important role in development of supplements?
Yeah. So the question was related. I don't know if everyone heard. The question was related to the gut microbiome, evidence surrounding it, and how herbal medicines can support that or not support that. That's a good question. How much time do we have? What's the time?
All day.
All day. I wish.
4 minutes to 10.
4 minutes to 10. Is Alan around? Because I can see on here that there's something at 10. Is that a different space? So we've got time, have we, Alan? Oh, excellent, excellent. Okay, can we take that question on the gut microbiome a little bit later? So I'm going to try and keep it general for now. I don't know if I've been succeeding in that, but we keep it general, and then we bring the gut microbiome back, because that's a really, really significant topic relating to health. So I would like to go into that. We're going to after. Does anyone else have any more general questions that they feel like would help them as this session proceeds?
I'm not sure whether it's relevant to what we were saying, but I'm just really interested in, you mentioned turmeric and how adding it to hot water that you used as an example doesn't actually release. Is there a way for the average person like me to understand what the, because I need a lot of turmeric and I've been told to put it in water, and now you're saying, like, so is there a way that we can understand what the best way of bringing
Is there a good book? I think so the question, I don't know if everyone heard the question. The question was how can we really know that was a good idea to do that with turmeric?
yeah, or
anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think. Yeah, good question. So I think, and it's the same thing that crops up with ecology, especially forest ecology. We have to look at. Firstly, you have to understand the scenario that we're in. So the setting that you're in is a highly medicalized society with specialists working. Very few of them do have access and education and training in medicinal plants, and even less have access to you, the public. So you don't have anyone. And the reason I'm saying it is because so I've travelled quite a bit. So I've lived quite a long time in Hungary. Now, if you go to a pharmacy in Hungary or a pharmacist in Hungary, they would be able to tell you the things that I'm telling you quite easily, and they stock medicinal plants as standard, and they know about them, so they can talk to you about them. So the folk history and that knowledge is very much present, and they're highly trained pharmacists, so they have the conventional medical training also. So what I mean to say is, culturally, you also have to recognise why we don't have that knowledge. So it's interesting that you ask, as an individual or as a group here, why don't we have that knowledge? But I think it's useful to understand why have we been disempowered in the ways that we have been disempowered, firstly, and then what can we do about that? So we'll go into it. So I think a lot comes down to putting knowledge and not allowing yourself to be disempowered. I think that's a good and a key thing. So as a pharmacist and doing some research in the last years of my training, we come to know that a lot of this knowledge, so ethnopharmacology, pharmacology, that knowledge sits in pharmaceutical companies. So the people generally are dispossessed of this knowledge, but you have very, very well and very highly trained ethnopharmacologists working for pharmaceutical companies, and it's big money and it's good money. So that's the reason. So what I would encourage is, yeah, just that question: like, how do we empower ourselves? And I would say expose yourself to places like this. Expose yourself to herbalists. So try and make, I don't know where you're based, but try and reach out to local herbalists around you.
So
Yeah,
yeah, I
great.
actually using herbalists, but I didn't understand that. So
Okay.
It's really interesting to know.
Okay, yeah. So I think as a general phenomena, try to surround yourself and try to reverse this process of disempowerment, of disengagement with the natural world. So not just in medicine, but also in ecology. So, but that disempowerment is only going to weaken our position as a people who should be able to have some sort of sovereignty in our own lives. Specifically and more technically, the question you asked was about the turmeric. So, when you do approach a medicinal plant, and you do have a good book, so you open up the book and you want to start to think about what the constituents are, what the active constituents are. Okay, so and look at the traditional formulas. So I won't go into the chemistry now, but there are the constituents, the chemical constituents will have different functional groups, and those functional groups will be more willing to associate with water or more willing to associate with oil or alcohol. So, or ethanol. So ethanol is a good one because it pulls out the oil soluble fraction also. If in doubt, just use milk. I say, if in doubt, just use milk, unless something has tannins in it, or even if something does have some tannins in it. If in doubt, use milk. Milk is an emulsion. So an emulsion it's an oil in water emulsion specifically. So an oil in water emulsion. So that means that there are proteins in milk which stabilize the microemulsion of oil in the water. So oil and water don't naturally mix, as you know. You need a surfactant, or you need something to act to bridge that polarity. So there are polarity. So you need a surfactant to pull that together. So if you're using soap, that's what happens when you're using soap. That's how you get oil and water to mix. That's how you get grease off your hands, is by using soap, which is a surfactant and allows the water that you're washing your hands with to mix with the oil, and then you wash it off. In milk, the surfactants are protein structures which hold the oil, little micelles they're called, little oil structures in water, and it makes it stable, and it's a stable emulsion. So if in doubt, make a herbal tea or herbal preparation in milk. If you don't want to use alcohol, which you probably don't.
Do you mean dairy milk?
I think he's setting me up here.
So basically you're telling us
Can't
like
drink
what
dairy.
physically
Yeah.
Are allergic to milk?
Yeah. Any milk that you get is an emulsion. Any alternative milk is also an emulsion of fat, of oil in water, which is fine. If you can use dairy milk from a good organic source, then I would say
I'm
do
just
that.
going to say that with things like turmeric, if you add like a spoon of coconut oil to your alternative milk, it will help for it to release the active compounds.
Yeah, that's great, and that's encouraging the curcumin to go into an oil fraction. So that's a really good one. Thank you, Puff. Anything else? Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yes, I'm going to make a lot of vodka.
You go with that. You hear what you want to hear.
I'll
That's
come
it.
back.
So we're happy on that
That
question.
was brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Changing tack slightly and going back to something you said earlier. You're moving away from reduction of scientific methodology. How do you evaluate effectiveness in holistic?
Yeah, great question. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
So the question was, if you're moving away from reductive scientific methodologies, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of these products?
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant question. So I am always using studies to inform my practice. So and my knowledge. So what I'm not saying is to reject that. I'm saying that it needs to be incorporated and integrated appropriately. So excellent question, because I think that could be done a lot better. So I sit in a lot of circles of herbalists and alternative practitioners, and what I'm not saying is to reject that. And so everything that I'm telling you, most of it has verifiable research behind it, because that's how I validate it for myself. Whether that's because I'm too much in my head or too into whatever it is, that's how I'm trained as a pharmacist, and that's how I feel comfortable practicing for my patients. The invitation is to not give so much credibility to the intellect, but start to work. And this is a more specific question. That's an excellent question. So it's also on a personal level. What I'm doing more is to trust my own body, and that's a very. We touched on it in a discussion yesterday, no, Prof? We were talking about, if you look at a pharmaceutical study of an for antidepressants, whatever it is, fluoxetine, citalopram, standard antidepressant medication. If you look into the clinical trials, the clinical trial data is based upon subjective questionnaires. How did you feel? How do you feel after today's dose? How do you feel after, so out of 5, out of 10, what's your, and they're quite detailed questions, but it's a subjective acknowledgement of what's happening in you in response to the drug. Now that research is actually heavily flawed. I'm going to just quickly put that out there, but nevertheless, the idea is an attempt to quantify something that is essentially qualitative. Yeah. Exactly. So it's qualitative data, but you're trying to quantify it. Okay. So you have to try and bridge that and do that, and there's a science to it. Or there's a methodology to it. But nevertheless, it's underpinned by qualitative data, coming from the body, coming from the person's subjective experience. So what I would like for myself, I'm going to say that, what I would like for myself is that I go more into my body, better understand my own needs, and use that as a tool, because I'm going to say explicitly, because I've only come to realize it relatively recently in my life, but the body holds a knowledge. The body holds a knowledge. So the body holds knowledge. And if you don't access it, or you don't know how to access it or listen to it, we've all, whoever has been schooled in this country, we've all been conditioned to shift and prioritize the mind. That's just how this society operates. We've shifted up into the mind, and that's the foremost, that's the power in our society. So we highly regard and highly respect intellectuals. We hold them in very high regard, and they usually are elevated in society. That's how it is, for better or for worse. What I would say is, how do we bring that back? Not to reject the intellect, because that would be a grave mistake. I, for one, don't operate in that way. I do really respect my own intellect and my own ability to see, for example, to reference those studies, or to even understand what's happening in those meta-analyses, as you mentioned, the meta-analyses and those randomized clinical control trials. If we reject it, we're also disempowering ourselves in that regard. And then you're putting yourselves at the mercy of these large pharmaceutical companies, because you can't speak the language they can speak, and so they're the predominant force here. Yeah. So now I'll come back to, well, it can be foxglove again, or it can be turmeric. You come back to foxglove. The folk medicine woman who's made up an extract. She'll take your pulse. She'll check multiple other things to see how that's affected you. I really don't recommend anyone doing anything with foxglove. I'm just going to put that out there again. But but there are ways. So turmeric, there are infinite number of variables that can affect the quality of a medicinal plant. So the way it grows, the soil it grows in, how much I've watered it, what else is growing around it. Then I harvest it. What time did I harvest it in the year? How do I process it? How do I dry it? How much oxidation has occurred to the product? So after all of that, you're not gonna be able to standardize that across the board. When I give it to someone, or when you take turmeric, if you've taken so much of it, you'll be able to tell, because curcumin is also bitter, so you can tell by the taste the quality of the product. When you put it in milk, I put a teaspoon of this turmeric in milk last week, but this batch I put a teaspoon of turmeric in the milk, and the colours are completely different. Again, the colour, curcumin, the curcuminoids, they're pigments. Again, by sight, you can see that the quality is different. The essential oils in turmeric. Okay, so you have essential oils in turmeric. I've never actually answered this question. It's an excellent question. So that the essential oils in the roots of ginger, and these roots do have essential oil compounds. So when you smell turmeric, fresh turmeric root, you can smell these essential oils. They also contribute to the medicinal activity. So there's that aspect. So you see what I'm saying? So by taste, by smell, by sight, what are the others? What I'm saying is I'm inviting you back when you drink that tea, and if you're in tune with your body, and I'm not particularly, I'm trying to be. So I'm not trying.